You are lying on the ground. Someone kneels over you, pressing your head still with both hands. In their other hand is a sharpened piece of stone. They press the edge against your skull, just above your ear, and begin to scrape. There is no hospital here. No clock on the wall because clocks do not exist yet. Just you, the ground beneath you, and the sound of stone against bone. Is this an attack? No. This is medicine. And for most of human history, it may have been some of the most effective medicine on Earth. The procedure is called trepanation, cutting or scraping a hole directly into a living human skull, on purpose. Archaeologists have found more than 1,000 skulls with exactly this kind of hole on nearly every inhabited continent, going back thousands of years. Trepaned skulls have turned up not just in Peru and France, but in Russia, North Africa, and China, evidence that people with no contact with one another arrived at the same unlikely idea independently. A striking number of the people this was done to survived it. Some lived for years afterward. So why would anyone, anywhere, let someone open their skull with a rock? The earliest confirmed case comes from a Neolithic burial site called Ensisheim, in what is now eastern France. Neolithic simply means the New Stone Age, the last stretch of prehistory before farming and permanent villages changed how people lived. The skull found there is more than 7,000 years old. The hole in it is not jagged like a wound. It is smooth, rounded, clearly cut on purpose. How could anyone tell the difference between a wound and a cure thousands of years later? By reading the edges. For a long time, scientists assumed a hole like this could only mean one outcome: death. Surely no one survived having part of their skull removed with Stone Age tools and no anesthesia. Then, in 1867, a French anatomist named Paul Broca examined a skull carried out of Peru by an American archaeologist, Ephraim George Squire. It had the same kind of hole. But around its edge, Broca noticed something the death sentence theory could not explain. New bone had grown there, smooth, rounded, healed. This was not a killing blow. This was a surgery someone had lived through. Bone only heals that way if a heart is still beating beneath it. For months. Sometimes years. So what had actually happened to this person? Broca had just proven something that seemed almost impossible for his era. Ancient people were not simply wounding each other's skulls. They were curing something, and a remarkable number of their patients walked away. That single skull opened one of the strangest ongoing investigations in archaeology. Over a century later, a researcher named John Verano at Tulane University, who has spent decades studying ancient human remains, examined more than 800 trepaned skulls from Peru alone. He tracked exactly how often the surgery worked and how that success rate changed over time. What he found rewrites almost everything you might assume about primitive medicine. Among the earliest skulls he studied, from a coastal culture called paracas, dating back roughly 2,000 years, only about 4 in 10 patients survived. That is a brutal number. But follow the timeline forward, and something remarkable happens. By the era of the Inca Empire, centuries later, survival rates climbed to somewhere between 70 and 80%. Read that again. 7 or 8 out of every 10 people who had a hole cut into their living skull, using nothing but sharpened stone or bronze tools, walked away from it. How does a skill like that even get passed down? Part of the answer might be stranger than you expect. In France, archaeologists have found a Neolithic-era cow skull, and even a wild boar skull, cut with the exact same technique used on human patients. One leading theory is that some ancient surgeons practiced on animals first, refining the pressure and angle of every cut before they ever touched a living person. Picture the operation itself. You are conscious, or close to it. Someone holds your head steady, while another works through your scalp, then scrapes or cuts a series of grooves into the bone underneath, patiently lifting away a small section, piece by piece. The surgeon works in small, careful passes, checking the depth again and again, rather than risk cutting too deep in one motion. It can take the better part of an hour. Notice something in many of these skulls. The cut deliberately avoids the exact center line of the head, the spot where a major blood vessel runs just beneath the bone. Why would that matter to someone with no concept of modern anatomy? Because it worked, and because someone remembered that it worked. Nobody wrote that rule down anywhere. It survived only in the memory of hands that had done this before, passed to the hands that came next. So what was actually being treated? In Peru, the likeliest answer is written right into the skulls themselves: fractures. Andean warfare relied heavily on slings and heavy clubs, weapons built to crush bone rather than pierce it. A shattered piece of skull pressing down on the brain was, on its own, a death sentence. Lifting away that broken piece and relieving the pressure may genuinely have saved lives, an early blunt version of the same emergency surgery a neurosurgeon performs today after severe head trauma. But not every trepanned skull shows an injury. Some show nothing at all. What were those people being treated for? Possibly headaches, possibly seizures, possibly what we would now describe as neurological or psychiatric conditions. Unable to see inside the head, healers may have reasoned that whatever was trapped in there simply needed a way out. It is not so different from how, for centuries afterward, physicians everywhere kept reaching for the same basic idea: find where the problem is trapped and give it an exit. Here is the part that should genuinely unsettle you. In 2018, researchers directly compared these ancient survival rates to a supposedly more advanced era: field surgery during the American Civil War, roughly 400 years after the peak of the Inca Empire. Union and Confederate surgeons had formal medical training, steel instruments, and centuries more accumulated science than any Inca healer. On paper, there was no contest. Their patients still died more often. How is that possible? Civil War skull surgery carried a survival rate of only around 50%, worse than the outcomes Verano was finding in operations performed with sharpened stone and zero understanding of germs. The difference was not intelligence, it was infection. Civil War surgeons often reused the same unsterilized instruments on multiple wounded soldiers in a single day, unknowingly spreading the very infections that killed their patients. Ancient surgeons, working outdoors with simple tools closer to single use, may have accidentally avoided a mistake it took modern medicine decades longer to fully understand. Sit with that for a moment. You probably pictured trepanation as a symbol of ignorance, a desperate act by people who didn't understand the body. The evidence says something closer to the opposite. Generations of healers, with no written language and no microscope, worked out through trial, memory, and repetition that some wounds could be treated by opening the skull. They kept refining that skill for thousands of years until they were achieving better outcomes than surgeons operating 3 centuries closer to your own lifetime. Does that change how you picture the people who came before you? You still carry a version of their instinct. Think about the last time you followed a method passed down by someone rather than read from a manual. A recipe adjusted by feel. A fix a parent showed you with their hands instead of words. That is the same fragile, priceless chain of knowledge that once decided whether a person with a shattered skull would live or die. Every time you trust a technique, simply because it has worked before, you are leaning on the same kind of accumulated, unwritten expertise that let a paracas or Inca surgeon place a blade exactly where it needed to go, and nowhere else. None of it was written in a textbook first. It was tested in real time on real people, and only the methods that kept people alive were ever passed on. You are lying on the ground. Someone is holding your head still. A sharpened tool is pressed against your skull. And this time, you already know the answer. Your odds of walking away were better than you would have ever guessed.